Hello, I'm Bob Trubshaw. I'd like to talk to you today about why, if you'd been a child in Leicester about 100 or 200 years ago, you'd be living in fear of Black Anice coming to get you if you didn't go to bed on time, or otherwise comply with parental instructions. To quote a poem by John Heyrick, published in 1797, "'Tis said the soul of mortal man recoiled to view Black Anice's eye so fierce and wild. Vast talons, foul with human flesh, there grew in place of hands, and features livid blue glared in her visage, while her obscene waist warm skins of human victims close embraced." I'll include the rest of this wonderful poem in the description below. Black Anice is probably the best known of Leicester's folklore characters. She allegedly had a bower, or cave, in the Dane Hills to the west of the city, which has almost survived, and I've been there, along with a posse of Morris dancers. In this video, I'll explore the way the meaning significance attributed to Black Anice and her bower have changed over time. The earliest record of Black Anice dates to 1622. It's in William Burton's book called The Description of Leicestershire. Pedantically, he refers to Black Agnes rather than Anice, and bear in mind the French pronunciation of Agnes is Anice. Burton considers Black Agnes to have been an anchorite, so we must assume that in 1622 she had yet to acquire the rather demonic persona described by Heyrick. No other references to Black Anice are known until 1764. Writing in 1895, the author Charles Bilson quotes a letter from Sir John Mellor, published in the 7th of November 1874 edition of the Leicester Chronicle, and Sir John Mellor wrote, "I have looked through my deeds, and I find that the earliest deeds in my possession, dated 13th and 14th May 1764, contain the following description. All that close or parcel of land commonly called or known by the name of Black Anice Bower Close." Clearly these deeds provide no indication of whether Black Annie was a real or mythic person, or whether by 1764 she had acquired a reputation for, shall we say, antisocial behaviour. We also know that every Easter Monday since at least the early 17th century, a fair was held on the Dane Hills, so very close to Black Anice's bower. Indeed, part of the festivities was a mock hare hunt, which started at Black Anice's bower, then continued as a procession to the mayor's door. Roy Palmer, in his book on Leicestershire folklore, notes that the mock hare hunt and procession was already ancient when it was first mentioned in the town records in 1668. Palmer also states that, despite opposition from the owner of Danehill Closes in the 1820s, the Danehill Fair was crowded with visitors, and that's reported in the Leicester Chronicle, this time in 1842. This clearly indicates that Black Anice's bower would be well known from the 17th century onwards until at least the 1840s. Black Anice is specifically mentioned in a very different context in 1837, at a time when presumably the Danehills Fair was well attended. Charles Bilson again reports that on the 4th of December 1837, a play called Black Anna's Bower, or The Maniac of the Dane Hills, it was performed at the Leicester Theatre, and Bilson tells us that the plot turned upon the celebrated murder of a landlady of the Blue Boar, which related to the histories of Leicester, and Black Anna played a part similar to that of the witches in Macbeth. Palmer discovered that this melodrama was written for the benefit night of one of the actors, a Mr. Higgy, and he quotes a review in the Leicester Journal. Palmer also found that the following Christmas another play based on local themes included a character called Black Anice. This was called The Broken Heart, or The Rose of Newark, and may have been based on a chapter in The Legends of Leicester in the Olden Times, written by Thomas Featherstone, and published earlier in 1838. Roy Palmer states that this play was written by the theatre manager, and he summarises the complex interplay of murder, madness, seduction, and all-round destruction. Standard melodramatic fare of the time, but somewhat unusually set during the English Civil War. In the course of these histrionics, the demented heroine becomes identified with Black Anna and tries to murder her seducer. If this seems rather overly imaginative, then it's decidedly lacklustre compared to John Dudley's speculations about Black Anice in his, shall we say, conjectural book Neology, or a treatise on the origin, progress and symbolical import of the sacred structures of the most eminent nations and ages of the world, published in 1846. Interestingly, John Dudley states that about 70 years previously, in other words about 1776, Black Anice's cave was open, but had subsequently filled up with rain-washed soil, although he doesn't give an indication of the source for these observations. There doesn't seem to be any further reference to Black Anice for about 30 years until, in 1874, William Kelly wrote about Black Anice in, well, a characteristically sensational style. Black Anice was said to be in the habit of crouching among the branches of the old pollard oak, the last remnant of the forest, which grew in the cleft of the rock over the mouth of her cave or bower, ever ready to spring like a wild beast on any stray children passing below. The cave she was traditionally said to have dug out of the solid rock with her fingernails. On my last visit to the bower close, now several years ago, the trunk of the old tree was then standing, but I know not if it still remains. Even more interestingly, he continues with the only known description of Black Anice's bower. At that time, and long previously, the mouth of the cave was closed, but in my school days it was open, and with 2 or 3 companions, I recollect on one occasion snatching a fearful joy by crawling on our hands and knees into the interior, which, as far as my recollection serves me at this distance of time, was some 7 or 8 feet long by about 4 or 5 feet wide, and having a ledge of rock for a seat running down each side. Note that Kelly was born in 1815, so his childhood recollections of the bower being accessible don't necessarily conflict with Dudley's statement that the cave had long been blocked by 1842. The memory of Black Anice must have thrived in the mid-19th century, as the Leicester Chronicle of the 5th of September 1874 states. Little children who went to run on the Dane Hills were assured that Black Anna lay in wait there to snatch them away to her bower, and that many like themselves she had scratched to death with her claws, sucked their blood, and hung up their skins to dry. And then Black Anice becomes, well, an indelible aspect of local lore in 1895, when Charles Bilson published his County Folklore volume for Leicestershire. Just a few years later, in 1907, J.C. Wall's survey of the ancient earthworks of Leicestershire for the Victoria County History described the Dane Hills as a marvellous maze of entrenchments, generally facing south and south-west. The deep sunken roads and the high aggers, many of them 48 feet and 60 feet on the scarp, enclosing hollows probably used as primitive dwelling places, and presenting a formidable stronghold. Portions of these works have been destroyed, and the remainder are now in the market for building sites. The Ordnance Survey fails in giving a correct plan. And sadly, this seems to be the only description we have of the Dane Hills before the builders moved in. Whether all those earthworks were quarrying, quite plausible. Whether there was something to do with Civil War entrenchments is another possibility. Where is Black Anice's bower? As already noted, Sir John Mellor's letter to the Leicester Chronicle, published in 1874, referred to deeds dated 1764 relating to Black Anice Bower Close. This area of land was part of the Dane Hills, which remained an area of rough, hillocky ground until after the Second World War, when houses were built. For some years, the site of the bower could still be reached along a footpath known as the Black Pad. About 20 years ago, the then owner of a house informed me that the deeds described the east end of his property to be part of Black Anice Bower Close. Indeed, the far end of the garden drops down almost vertically, about 2.5 metres. Below this steep slope, the ground has been levelled off into a small lawn, and, according to the owner, the ground surface was previously several feet lower. In the adjoining garden, this steep slope curves around, but because the whole street was built on a fairly steep hill, the adjoining gardens don't share this dramatic feature. The total length of the steep slope as it curves round is probably 20 to 30 metres, although there is no surviving bower or shallow cave. Indeed, Kelly noted that the cave had long been blocked off by 1874. But this natural geological feature seems entirely plausible as the location of a cave with the sort of dimensions Kelly recalls. For a number of years, the all-female Black Anice Morris dance team have danced on the small lawn beside the supposed bower during the evening of the midsummer solstice. I was privileged to be invited to witness this. Charles Bilson's final reference to Black Anice brings in another legendary aspect. He's writing at the turn of the 19th-20th century. Some warehouse girls told me a short time ago that Black Anice was a witch who lived in the cellars under Leicester Castle, and that there was an underground passage from the cellar to the Dane Hills, along which she ran. And well, such a tunnel would need to drop down very steeply from the cellars, because it has to pass underneath the River Soar, which runs at the side of the Leicester Castle. Roy Palmer also draws attention to Black Anice's associations with the castle. Until recent years, so he's talking about post-Second World War, Leicester children living near the Newark, which is now part of De Montfort University campus, were afraid to pass at night through Rupert's Gateway, leading to the castle, because a witch called Cat Anna was reputed to lurk there. Cat Anna seems a likely corruption of Black Anice and our reputation for scratching children to death with her claws. And Rupert's Gateway is not far from the entrance to the castle cellars, suggesting that Bilson's 1890s warehouse girls and Palmer's mid-20th century children were recounting a legend with shared origins. Until recent decades, parents were often quick to evoke horrifying bogey-persons to encourage children to go to bed on time or otherwise obey parental instructions. Charles Dickens epitomised these childhood anti-guardians in the 5th chapter of Dombey and Son, where a nursemaid demands a little girl to go to sleep with the words, "My goodness gracious me, Miss Floy, you naughty sinful child, if you don't shut your eyes this minute, I'll call them hobgoblins that lives in the cockloft to come and eat you up alive." Apart from being named in Sir John Mellor's deeds, the oldest description of Black Anice is the lurid poem by John Heyrick. Now, when I first encountered this description, which is about 35 years ago, it put me in mind of the Hindu goddess of destruction, Kali. She is characteristically depicted with blue skin, a grotesque face, poking tongue, exceptionally long fingernails, a necklace of skulls, and dancing barefoot on a corpse. In 2004, I commissioned this depiction of Black Anice from the leading tattoo artist Jenny Clark, and it was used as a book cover. John Heyrick, the author of that lurid poem, styles himself as a lieutenant in the 15th Regiment of Light Dragoons. This later became the 15th, 19th King's Royal Hussars. The 15th's official online history states that in the 50 years after being founded, which was in 1759, they fought all over the world, notably in India and North America. However, about 20 years ago, I made contact with Roberta Twin, as she was then, Roberta Goldwater now, the assistant curator at the Soldier's Life Discovery Museum in Newcastle upon Tyne, and she kindly checked the regiment's records. She informed me that John Heyrick first served in the Leicestershire Yeomanry Cavalry, and then was appointed cornet in the 15th Light Dragoons on the 3rd of October 1795, and was later promoted to lieutenant on 10th of February the following year. However, he died a year later, aged just 35. Between 1795 and 1797, the regiment was stationed in Holland, Germany, but predominantly England, and John Heyrick would not have served in India or even Ceylon. There's certainly a possibility that Heyrick's interest in India was instigated by conversations with fellow officers who had served there. However, Heyrick could have encountered Kali without visiting India. In 1784, the pioneer scholar of Indian culture, Sir William Jones, started the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Its journal, originally called Asiatic Researches, started publication in 1788, but after 1832 it changed its name to the Journal of the Asiatic Society. This journal, along with Jones's trailblazing English translations of Indian religious texts, quickly made Indian iconography, such as Kali, both fashionable and familiar among the British literary world of the 1790s. Quite reasonably, Heyrick could have combined Kali's striking image with existing lore of a bogey woman, which was already current among children in Leicester. Indeed, in anticipation of the scared tactics used by Charles Dickens' nurse, it is perhaps possible that Black Anice was memorably invoked by John Heyrick's own childhood nurse to command him to close his eyes this minute or otherwise toe the behavioural line. We can only speculate how and when part of Sir John Mellor's estate acquired the association with Black Annie. All we know for sure is she's mentioned in the deed of 1764. And likewise, we can only speculate about why she was black. By the mid-18th century, there were 4 key options. Firstly, was she a local lass who happened to have dark hair and spent much of her life outdoors, so was always suntanned? At that time, suntans were associated with very lowly social status. Secondly, was she fully or partly descended from an African slave? Such slaves had already become fairly common in the households of landed gentry by that time. The third option is that she was a servant brought over from the India subcontinent. Again, plenty of examples are known from the 18th century. Whether or not this accounts for the Kali-like aspects of Heyrick's lurid verse, well, has to be an open question. And the fourth option is that Black Anice was of Romany origin. After all, her bower was associated with an annual fair, where almost certainly gypsy traders and fortune-tellers would have been regular vendors. Just perhaps Black Anice took up residence in her bower for the duration of the fair, just as by the 20th century countless people have dressed up as Gypsy Rosie Lee and offered to read people's fortunes. There was considerable racial stereotyping about the appearance of Romany travellers. This photograph, taken in Sapka in the mid-1940s, is an example. These local young people have dressed up for a carnival as, well, rather romanticised gypsies. Note that several have blackened their faces. And if Black Anice extends back much before the mid-18th century, then there's also religious stereotyping to consider. If there had been some sort of Catholic anchoress called Agnes living in the bower, then, well, after the Reformation it would be entirely plausible for her to be all but demonised in subsequent Protestant folk memory. Whether there ever was a real person called Black Anice, Annie or Anice, or only ever a legendary figure, we perhaps will never know. Either way, the idea of a woman living on her own in a small cave would have suggested someone with an antisocial reputation. Indeed, such a solitary, presumably older woman could easily have had an unpleasant side to her personality. One way or another, such a person could have been exemplified as the sort of nasty bogey-person that has been called upon throughout the ages to coerce or threaten children,